There's an ancient form of philosophy that has been around for more than 2,000 years that has an incredible ability to transform and improve the quality of your life. It is called, of course, Stoicism. Stoicism seems to be all the rage now. A lot of people are talking about the notion of how to become more stoic. We talk about great books like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and the author Ryan Holiday is a very prolific writer in the space of Stoicism. But what I want to do in this particular episode of the Changing Minds podcast is walk you through the most important elements of Stoicism, what it is, what it's all about, how it came to be, but most importantly, how you can start to use it to be able to improve the quality of your life. I've done a number of episodes before on cognitive behavioral therapy, and one I did on cognitive behavioral therapy and Stoicism back a number of years ago. But today, I'm going to stick all of my attention on the importance and the power of the philosophies and the practical tools behind one of the greatest philosophies that has ever been created. So, let's get stuck in. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Change Your Minds podcast. I'm Owen Fitzpatrick, and today we're going to be talking about Stoicism. Now, Stoicism is one of those forms of philosophy that is really great if you want to be able to improve your life. It's great for you to be able to change the way you think. You could argue that from a cognitive behavioral therapy perspective, if you were to identify a perfect kind of philosophy behind cognitive behavioral therapy, it would be Stoicism. Stoicism has a lot of things in common with CBT. It's a lot of things in common even with NLP. And there's a lot of ideas that by leveraging these ideas, by using some of the tools and concepts and principles of Stoicism, that you can really improve the way in which you deal with the world. It's so effective at helping you to be able to handle, especially a lot of the challenges or adversity that you might be dealing with. It allows you to handle change in a more effective way too. So what I want to do is start by walking through the history of Stoicism, how it came to be, why it's called Stoicism in the first place. I'm going to, of course, butcher a number of ancient Greek names and pronounce them in a really weird way, so it's difficult for you to be able to follow. And by the end of the story of how Stoicism happened, then we'll start to move more towards a little bit about what goes on in the brain until we finally arrive at, okay, what are the key principles of Stoicism and the most important techniques or practices to become more stoic. I'm really excited, and we're going to start with a history lesson. So starting off with the history, we have to go back to the 3rd century BC. And a guy called Zeno of Citium founded the school of Stoicism, which taught that virtue was known as being made up of things like wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Virtue is what it's all about. Virtue is the highest good. It's what we all should aspire to having. It's really a lot to do with the kind of character you build for yourself. And it's the one thing that you need to pursue is what kind of person do you become? And how can you become the greatest person? How can you demonstrate the most amount of virtue? And Stoicism really emphasized from the very, very beginning, living in harmony with nature and with reason, focusing on what we can control, as well as accepting what we can't. Lots of great ideas that we're going to dig into as we go through it. But Zeno of Citium was this guy who was a merchant, and he lost everything in a shipwreck. And he landed and decided he would seek wisdom in Athens. So he's lost everything, right? The dude is so depressed. It's kind of like, you know the way Tony Robbins is the story where he's like washing his dishes in the bathtub and he's listening to Neil Diamond, I feel, but no one was there except for the chair. You know that old chestnut? If you haven't, check out Awaken the Giant Within. He does the story, or maybe it's Unlimited Power. Anyway, that's Tony's story. And then in Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now, he talks about how he was really depressed, and then all of a sudden he asked himself who's been depressed and who isn't, and it's to do with the self, and there's two selves and all that sort of stuff. Kind of butchering the story a little. The point is, Zeno actually had one of those stories, which was, to me, even more impressive. You lose everything you have in a shipwreck, like everything, and all of a sudden you're starting from scratch, right? That's really rags to riches. Now, he didn't become super rich in the end, but rags to successful philosopher, which I think is important. So he sought wisdom in Athens. He would study Socrates' teachings through Xenophon's writings, not necessarily directly from Socrates, obviously, but also would learn about cynicism from people like Crates of Thebes, which, again, if that's your name, I feel so bad. I think his name was actually Crates, but the way it looks when you read it is Crates of Thebes. That doesn't sound like a person. That sounds like there's crates of these Thebes things, whatever they are. But Thebes, I think, must be a place. Anyway, the reason it's called Stoicism in the first place is that oftentimes what Zeno would do is he would form and they would have conversations around the painted porch. And the Greek name for the painted porch was stoapikili. Go on, look it up. Guarantee you pronounced it great. Stoapikili. Now, a lot of people might call it stoapikili. Say it quicker, that doesn't make it better. Anyway, this was in Athens, so a lot of people would talk and share wisdom around this painted porch. So Zeno would set up shop there. The main tenets of it was that virtue is the sole measure of a good life, and you cultivate this through rigorous self-discipline, right? So you could see sort of a little bit of influence of Socrates and a bit of influence of cynicism at the time, but really it was a different angle. And he really focused in on a number of these kind of qualities that we talked about beforehand. But after this came leaders like Cleanthes and Chrysippus, who expanded on Stoic thought. Cleanthes, we don't have much of his writings, but we do know that he tended to live very virtuously, so he demonstrated a lot of the qualities apparently. And Chrysippus did actually become quite a prolific writer and shared a lot of Stoicism's intellectual ideas. So he's responsible for putting down in writing a lot of the intellectual foundations of Stoicism itself. Stoicism kind of went through another phase a little bit later. So a couple of 100 years, I suppose, came back and sort of made a return. And it never went away, but it became more popular again with the likes of Seneca, who was someone who was a tutor to Emperor Nero. But he wasn't a very good tutor because Nero ended up being an absolute psychopath. He was like a lunatic. Therefore, I don't know about you, but if it's like, oh, who else did you, I'm thinking of hiring you as my mentor. Who else is it? Nero? Are you kidding me? And Nero was a kid when Seneca, I'm not going to blame Seneca for Nero, but he didn't help, right? If he was better, he could have made Nero a hero. You like what I did there? No? Okay. Anyway, Seneca became known for a number of writings around Stoicism. And then there was also Epictetus, who was around same kind of time. He was a former slave that turned teacher who focused on what you can control and what you can't. Again, had a number of writings there himself. Marcus Aurelius is probably one of the most, if not the most famous of all of the philosophers, known to many as the kind of philosopher king, as Plato would make it, someone who represented a leader, global leader, that represented a lot of the qualities of Stoicism. And his book, of course, is famous Meditations, which still to this day is a huge bestseller, an incredible book that is, even though it was written thousands of years ago, it still feels very timely and it makes sense and you can resonate and relate to an awful lot of wisdom in it. It's a wonderful book. So this really showed a commitment to Stoic practices in leadership and life. And once again, he was not just a prolific writer about it, but he was also a great example of it, Marcus Aurelius. By the way, also in the first Gladiator, he was the Da. So the Da was Marcus Aurelius of, the lunatic that wanted to be with his sister and like caused all the problems for Maximus. It was Marcus Aurelius that died. That he was, and the theory goes that he was killed by a Joaquin Phoenix, whatever he was playing. Claudius, wasn't it? Yeah, he was a bad puppy. Anyway, Stoicism now has a modern influence. I mentioned earlier that cognitive behavioral therapy, very much an awful lot of Stoicism is kind of like aligned with the philosophy behind CBT. Mindfulness as well has a lot in common. And just generally this whole notion of self-discipline, an awful lot of the writings out there, even not just the ones that are written by authors like I mentioned Ryan Holiday, but a lot of the other books out there that formulate these are the best practices or these are the ideas, a lot of self-help literature. There's an awful lot of Stoic influence over such books also as well. So let's look at the core principles of Stoicism. What are the kinds of principles that Stoicism suggests? The first is virtue is the highest good. So it's all about virtue. Now, we're not talking about virtue signaling. Look how virtuous I am. We're talking about virtue in the sense that virtue is made up of a number of qualities. And the thing is not to show to everyone else how much virtue you have, but to actually develop and cultivate that virtue. Right? It's to be a virtuous person, not to let everyone know how virtuous you are. And I think sometimes in the modern world, we spend too much time trying to show how virtuous we are by what we agree with, what we don't agree with, as opposed to living the life that we want to live, which is a virtuous life. And so Stoicism is very much about becoming virtuous. A big part of Stoicism is about focusing on what you can control as opposed to what you can't. So learning to control your actions, your judgments, your attitudes are things you can control. And then accepting what you can't control, like external events or outcomes, or sometimes internal events like sickness or illness. There's things you can control and things you can't. And it's one of the most important elements, I think. One of the most important mindsets to have is what I call the agency mindset or the control mindset. It's the ability to compartmentalize every single thing in your life into what can you control, what can you influence, and what's outside of your control. And that's something that the Stoics have been talking about since day one. So really, really important for us to be able to get better at that. And if there's one of the most important lessons, that is it. The next is rationality and logic. And really the way in which Stoics would think would be to try to be as rational and logical about things. But that didn't mean that they didn't use emotion. Emotion was important to Stoicism, but it was just when they were making decisions. They're making decisions in terms of what's the smartest and most useful thing to do here. So they were using reason to be able to navigate life, to be able to go, what's the smartest or best thing for me to do here? As I mentioned, emotion was a part of it, but they were able to manage emotions like anger, envy, and fear to be able to maintain inner peace. So not a million miles away from the notion of mindfulness. It's about being able to find a way to be able to detach yourself from some of the emotions that you might be experiencing. So you're not allowing the emotion to drive a lot of behaviors or actions that it might do. And instead, you're able to separate yourself a little bit from that perspective. That's what we're really looking at being able to do. And so this emotional resilience that you build comes as a result of you not identifying too much with those emotions. Practical wisdom is something that you will cultivate whenever you're working with Stoicism. The idea is that you're striving to improve, making better decisions, and asking yourself how you can act with more virtue moving forward. And we'll talk more and we'll go deeper a bit on what exactly that looks like. Social responsibility is another factor. Acting justly and ethically, doing the right thing for the right reasons. And then presence, being fully present, reflecting on your actions and aligning them with your values, making sure that the way you act is aligned with how you want to act. A big part of this is preventing yourself from falling into the temptations that might lead you down to make the wrong decisions and therefore sabotage yourselves. So it's really vital for us to be able to get better at making sure that we're reflecting on what we're doing and making sure that what we're doing aligns with what we want to be doing. It lets us to be able to create the kind of results that we want in our life. So that's particularly important. Now, from a neuroscience perspective, the neuroscience of Stoicism kind of looks at the fact that you could argue that prefrontal cortex activation is an important piece because what we're doing is we're using the, let's say, ability we have to be rational, to make better decisions, to be able to engage in our self-control, to be able to change the way in which we feel, to change our perception, to learn to tell ourselves new stories. That's really something that Stoicism helps us to do, as it also does cognitive reappraisal. This means reframing thoughts in different ways. So how can I tell myself a different story about what this means? How can I interpret the fact that I feel this and see it differently as a result? In fact, Lisa Feldman Barrett, in her great work around constructing emotions, one of the things that she talks about is the fact that our emotions, generally speaking, are things that we construct, and we construct them based upon us interpreting our what we call affect, which is the physical experience that we feel, and we interpret that based on the context. Well, one of the things we can do, and she's mentioned this as well, is it's not just that we interpret it based on the context. If we change the story we tell ourselves about the context and what it means, that can also change the way in which we interpret the emotion. So it's not just the context we're in, but it's the story we tell ourselves. And that's something that Stoicism really looked at. It didn't say story, but it was very much about helping us to reevaluate the way in which we interpret the world. So not just seeing something as bad and thinking it's bad, therefore it's bad, but being able to change our perception of that. And as a result of that, recognizing that is something under our control. And of course, using mindfulness, emotional regulation promotes calmness and focus. Well, we know that whenever we're able to separate ourselves from the emotion itself, that can help us to reduce the intensity and reduce the activity of the emotional parts of the brain, things like the amygdala. The amygdala is a part of our brain that tends to respond by identifying potential threats, which in turn can start to kick off some of the reactions. And when we're able to change the story we tell ourselves, we change what is perceived as a threat or not, which is important. Now, in terms of Stoicism in practice, let me sort of give you a number of different elements, a number of different actions, practical actions you can take in order for you to get better at involving Stoicism in the way in which you live your life. First of all, the most important thing in my book is focusing on what you can control, letting go of external worries and concentrating on what's your responses and what's your actions. Make everything about what can you control. When you train yourself to ask yourself, what can I control here? What's in my influence? And what is outside of my control or influence? That's going to be a game changer for your life. So what can you control is the first lesson to make sure you practically take. Second of all, living in the present. Avoid dwelling on the past or fearing the future. I mean, Eckhart Tolle wrote a whole book on the power of now. And really the whole notion that the Stoics have been talking about for many, many years is when you're living in the present, it allows you to be able to make it so that you're acting in accordance with nature. Whenever you go back into the past, whenever you go into the future, that's when a lot of the troubles lie. That's when a lot of the emotional struggles lie. So try to make it so that you're living in the present to the best of your ability. Third thing is to cultivate virtue. This means make daily efforts to embody wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. We're going to talk a little bit about each of those qualities in a bit. But once again, it's what can you do to ensure that you're demonstrating wisdom? What can you do to demonstrate courage? What can you do to demonstrate justice? And what can you do to demonstrate temperance as you move forward? Next, embrace adversity as opportunity. Once again, this is something I'm sure you will have heard of, but a lot of people won't know that it actually stems back to as far back as Stoicism. But it's seeing adverse events as an opportunity. If you think about good old Zeno, he must have been able to see his shipwreck as an opportunity, right? And that's very difficult to do. Your whole life wiped out and you somehow find a way to be able to turn that into an opportunity. But if Zeno was never shipwrecked, maybe we would never have had Stoicism. So the philosophy was the byproduct of the shipwreck, which is an example of incredible opportunity coming out of his whole legacy, coming out of one of the worst disasters that could happen to a person. So embrace adversity and ask yourself, how can this be an opportunity for me moving forward? The next is to reflect daily in the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He literally was writing his diary. That's what the Meditations is. It's like an opportunity for us to see into the mind of one of the greatest leaders of all time. And in the Meditations, one of the things he talks about is the importance of meditating on these things, the importance of reflecting on the kinds of experiences that he had, because we can learn a massive amount when we give ourselves the opportunity to reflect on those kind of lessons and what's important for us to know. The next is practicing gratitude. Appreciate what you have. Obviously, the research out there in the area of psychology suggests that gratitude journaling and writing down the 3 things that you feel grateful for every day is great for your brain and great for the likelihood that you'll be able to cultivate a regular habit of happiness and a sense of feeling good about your life. Gratitude is also something that the Stoics saw as being particularly important. Developing emotional resilience is another thing. Strengthen your ability to manage emotions. Epictetus taught a lot about this, focusing on what you could control, focusing on what you could do, and recognizing the adversity or the challenges that you face could provide you with opportunities as well. Stoicism was also about simplifying your life, eliminating distractions, and getting down to what's most important. Again, there's books out there like The One Thing, or books out there by Cal Newport. He's written a number of books like on deep work and whatnot, which really comes down to narrowing everything down and focusing on just what matters. Oliver Burkeman has also written a number of books which really talk about being able to stop trying to do everything, stop trying to manage everything. But once again, that's something that the Stoics were saying quite a while back. Self-discipline is also something. Now, the Stoics weren't the only ones talking about self-discipline back then. There was a lot of different philosophies that emphasized the importance of self-discipline, but this is controlling your impulses so that you can focus on the long-term goals and avoiding those temptations because you want to be able to get the result that you're looking for. Aligning your actions with nature. So it's again, not fighting against what's actually going on, but accepting what is and accepting and rolling with it and doing what you need to do. Constantly learning about what you can learn about, trying to develop, learning the skills of wisdom, the skills of courage, the skills of justice, the skills of temperance. And if we look at what those are, right, wisdom is the ability to make good decisions, the ability to be able to think in clever ways and make the smartest, best possible decisions. Courage is the ability to do what it is that we need to do. Like there's all different interpretations of it, but fundamentally doing what it is that we need to do, despite the fact that it might be scary. Justice is our ability to be able to be fair and be good. And then temperance is the ability to be able to not engage in anything too much and not become too obsessed with anything. And these kind of qualities, while we all might have slightly different interpretations of them, fundamentally, we can practice them. That's one of the fundamental things that Stoicism says. It says that we can actually get better at each of those qualities. We can work and become more virtuous as a result. And one of the most important elements as well was serving others. So serve others, try to contribute to the community, make a better life for everyone. So as you can see, there's an awful lot of overlap between Stoicism and a lot of the insights and ideas that we've heard over the last 150 years in the self-improvement world, in the psychology world. But what makes this beautiful is this has been around for more than 2,000 years, which suggests that it's something that fundamentally is necessary for the human condition. Because if a form of philosophy was really helpful in the 3rd century BC, and it's really helpful in 2025, that suggests that the core elements of this approach means that it really does work. I mean, to me, it's one of those things that it's got such a track record that you can't but look at Stoicism as being one of the most effective and important philosophies that has ever been created, because it's still working effectively to this day. And I would argue it's even more important than it has ever been, a lot of the principles and ideas that we're getting out there, because never has so much been outside of our control, for instance. So we really need to be able to accept that. There's a couple of other things I wanted to mention. There's two in particular, two sort of slogans that oftentimes when people love Stoicism, they have it like tattoos on their body with these two concepts. The first is memento mori. And I love this because it really means remember you're going to die. Memento mori, remember you're going to die. And we might laugh and go, imagine that. Imagine that's what the Stoics were saying. It's like, hey, bro, listen, just to let you know, first class, just you're going to die. And that's the whole thing. The whole point of this class is to remind you that you're going to die. But actually, the reminder you're going to die helps because it allows you to recognize the importance of doing what it is that you need to do in the moment and recognizing that whatever you're stressing about is not nearly going to be as big as you think it is. It's not nearly as a big a deal as you think it is. And so memento mori is one of those really cool phrases that a lot of times people have, like I said, on slogans or t-shirts or coins or whatever the case may be. And then the other one is amor fati, which is love of fate. And that means getting your mindset around to the fact that you start to accept what is, that you don't fight against it. You just accept what is. This is what's happening. So whenever adversity strikes, instead of going, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is so unfair, we just learn to just accept what is. Once again, we focus on what we can control, but we accept what is. We accept what happens to us. And that's what I love about Stoicism. It wasn't like a super positive approach to life. It was very sort of rational, but it also looked at the dark side as well. There's another piece to it where it was very much about the premeditation of evils, as it was known. It was like preparing ahead of time for what might go wrong and thinking through that. And what are you going to do when this happens? So that's even important from a strategic thinking point of view. So Stoicism is really a wonderful set of tools that could help us to be able to improve the way in which we deal with and tackle life. So if you're looking to read more on it, I've already told you Ryan Holiday is a very prolific author. He's written books like The Obstacle is the Way, Stillness is the Key, Ego is the Enemy, Discipline is Destiny, Courage is Calling, and Right Thing Right Now. So they're all books by Ryan Holiday. He's a great writer. The Daily Stoic as well. He wrote that with Stephen Hanselman. It's like a calendar. It's like 365 like one-liners to do with Stoicism, which is excellent. He wrote also a book called Lives of the Stoics, I think again with Hanselman. And that was more about the short biographies of some of the most important figures in terms of the history of Stoicism. But some of the older books, Discourses in Enchiridion by Epictetus, Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. But the most important of all, if you're asking me what's one book that you would recommend on Stoicism, it's Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Wonderful book. And again, ridiculously relevant for the modern day. Anyway, I hope you found this useful. This has been the Changing Minds podcast, an episode all about Stoicism, how Stoicism can change your life. And I really hope you're going to not only remember all of the information that we shared, but most importantly, that you're going to be able to use it and start to allow yourself to leverage the wonderful potential of Stoicism to improve the quality of your life. Now, as you move forward, please do keep in touch. Let me know how you're getting on. Rate and review. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you would be so nice and so well inclined. That would be great. And if you are inclined and want to learn more about me, or you want to be able to hear from me more often, please do subscribe also to my newsletter, owenfitzpatrick.com/newsletter, and you'll get a copy of Inner Propaganda in your email every single week, which is worth going for and worth doing. But for now, take care, be well, stay stoic, and may the force as always be with you. Peace out.